It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. And, yeah.
Yeah. No smile from me this week.
Yeah. I
I'm in all
smiled
black.
because
I'm in mourning.
yeah, I smile to hide the pain. So tears of a clown, man. Smokey Robinson. Look, Ohio State lost to Oregon 32-31. We do have to talk about it. We'll get into it. All the whys and
we're gonna
wherefores.
talk about it a lot.
Oh, there's lots to talk about. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about it.
The season is over.
Yeah, we're going to exorcise these demons from our bodies that have been festering for the past couple of days while we thought and stewed about this. I want to call you out, though, to start the Dubcast. Last week, you were skeptical about Ohio State's ability to win this game. And I was like, George brings up some good points. I'm finding myself a little less confident based on the things that he's saying. And then I went ahead and picked Ohio State to win anyway. And you went ahead and picked Ohio State to win anyway.
That's
so
right.
I want to know.
We had identical score predictions, actually.
We did. 28-24. And I want to know what changed from your original assessment that went so wrong on Saturday.
Well, like I said, you can go back and watch the show that we did from I think it was the week leading into the first game where we did, or it was either that or the week before that. It was the season preview we did where we answered a bunch of questions that we came up for each other. Mm-hmm. And we both agreed back then regarding Oregon. Like, if you asked me to pick a winner of the Oregon game right now during the final weeks of August, I would say that Ohio State probably loses that game on paper.
Sure.
Some stuff changed between then and now. The big thing I thought relative to what kind of changed my mind a little bit as the week went on was particularly the game that Oregon had against Boise State, where Ashton Jeanty. I've seen the name written a lot, but not actually said out loud. Anyway, Boise State's the front runner for the Heisman Trophy had a pretty good day on the ground against Oregon, which I don't think anybody expected going into the season. So,
and that performance against Jeanty looks a lot better in retrospect, because then he was rattling off 200-yard games against literally everybody else, right? So it's like, oh, okay.
So it cut Oregon a little bit of slack,
right.
But in any event, it made me think, okay, high-level running backs can have success against this front. We've mostly seen improvement from week to week from Ohio State on the ground, on the offensive line going into this. And then I spoke a couple weeks ago about how I, built this data model for predicting games within a certain spread that I've used to kind of evaluate various matchups through the season. I have two different sets that I use for games lined within a field goal and then games that are lined at 3.5 points to a touchdown. And it so happened that this game fit the criteria for that, because the line for most of the week was 3.5 points. I think Ohio State closed as a 3-point favorite, so right within that range. When I ran the analysis for that, this thing doesn't predict with 100% accuracy, but it does it at a clip that says there's an edge relative to what you would get for, making picks in some cases. So when I looked at all of the variables that go into that model that I made, the thing that stood out to me the most in terms of where I thought this game was going to be won was, can Ohio State stop Oregon on the ground? And based on the effectiveness that we've seen from the defense so far, I thought, yeah, that's probably realistic. And that makes me feel good because, if Ohio State has to play from behind in this game, provided they don't fall behind by multiple scores, I don't trust Oregon's ability to run the ball consistently where they'll be able to kill clock and keep their lead, and that'll give Ohio State an opportunity to come back. Also, if Ohio State is stopping Oregon on the ground, that is going to make them rely more on Dylan Gabriel. And although he's been very good, he has also been prone to mistakes, particularly in the red zone, that I think could cost Oregon scoring opportunities. Given the effectiveness of the defense so far, I think that they'll be able to force Dylan Gabriel to make those mistakes. So I was able to gradually, once I was looking at the numbers more closely, talk myself into more scenarios where I could see Ohio State winning than I could see Oregon winning. Now, the game ended up coming down to a handful of plays. So it's hard to say that as long as you didn't predict the game to be a multi-score blowout either way, I think it's kind of hard to criticize picking either side in this
Sure.
game if it
Right.
was, within a one score thing, particularly because it ended up being a 1 point game. And I think we heard a stat earlier today that somebody posted in our Slack that said this was the first time that a top 5 matchup had been decided by a single point since like before I was born, like 1991.
That's
Like I
kind of
think they
wild.
said it was wide right 1, that infamous game between, was it Florida State and Florida or Miami? I don't know.
I think it was 2 Florida teams. I think I always forget that,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah. But in any event, it was a narrowly close game. So yeah, if you want to jokingly kind of,
It's not
make
joking. I have my appreciation for your prognostication has decreased. Of course
whatever.
it's joking. Of course it's joking.
You're stuck with me, buddy.
No. It's all good. Look, we both had the same prediction. It turned out basically the same way, that I think either of us would have said. Like I was telling people at work, like, Johnny, what do you think? What do you think? I'm like, I think it's a coin flip, man. Like, I don't, these are two very well-matched teams in some ways. You got to go on the road at Oregon. Oregon's a great team. But that's not going to take away from a lot of the criticisms I think that we're going to have as we kind of go through this. So I do want to, I want to do a quick kind of rundown, because this is a game we actually looked at it before we started recording. Featured 7 lead changes, which is insane. Multiple missed opportunities for, I think, both teams to kind of take advantage of the other team's miscues to really like dominate the game. And then ultimately it came down to some mismanagement on the part of Ohio State, some controversy, but one of those things where I really, you would look at this in a vacuum and go, that was a game Ohio State should have won, right? Like there's a lot of other things that are there, but I think all things considered, even with the injuries and things like that, that's a game that Ohio State should have won, could have made a big statement doing so. But just I think made some of the same mistakes that we've seen under Ryan Day against really top flight opponents. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Interesting to me. So Ohio State, I did not expect them to come out as strongly as they did. I mean, that first series, that 75 play series, which by the way, or 75-yard series, Ohio State, this is the other stat. I don't think they started a series closer than their own 26-yard line. So they were going pretty much the length of the field. I
pointed that out in the post-game article.
Yeah. So there you go. So they were going the length of the field pretty much the entire game. And yet on that first series, they were like bound and determined to score, to get points. They had a 4th down that they successfully converted. They looked good. Like it looked like things were going well. Oregon had to punt the next series. And then you start to see some of those mistakes, kind of creep in. Quinshon Judkins, who had a really bad game, fumbles the ball.
Worst game of the season.
Game of the season. One of the worst games of his career, frankly. He's, apparently been dealing with a little bit of a hand injury, but he fumbles the ball, gives Oregon the football right in Ohio State territory. They score literally two plays later after a big run from Jordan James, he had an interesting night too, because he was, for the most part, bottled up, but then he had a few really key runs in the same vein of like a Donovan Edwards against Ohio State and whatnot, where you just had these like crucial runs at really, really bad times for Ohio State.
Well, I think the same way Travion Henderson was effective in this game, even though he only touched the ball 10 times. He had, I think, 2 or 3 really key runs that supported the fact that he had, I think, a pretty solid overall game. Yep. It's just Judkins didn't really provide the same support that he's had in previous cases. I don't really think one team outrushed the other. Oregon,
they were
I
pretty
think,
much
finished with
maybe
14 or four. It was like either 4 or 14 more rushing yards, and they did it on like 2 less carries. So their yards per carry was like 5 compared to Ohio State having it 4.3. So they technically did outrush Ohio State, but it wasn't by a substantial margin or
But
anything.
I would say it was
the
pretty
defense
much
did not shut them down on the ground the way that I was hoping that they would.
Yeah, agreed. So, and 2 of those big runs from Travion Henderson actually happened on the subsequent drive where Ohio State took a 14-6 lead. And then, Oregon comes right back. They get a field goal and after a touchdown. And so you've got this back and forth where it looks like both teams are just kind of throwing haymakers. Oregon, I think this is where I started to get a little bit nervous. Dylan Gabriel's been a really good quarterback for Oregon all year, but his MO up until this game had been 5-10 yard, little flare passes, get guys in space, allow them to try to like get yards after catch, that kind of stuff. And instead, he's starting to throw bombs. And that's when I started to get a little nervous about how this is going to turn out, because then we started to see Denzel Burke get toasted, just absolutely just smoked on a lot of these plays. And they were just throwing right at him, man. And like Davison Igmanosin, he's going to do about 80%. He's a handsy guy, right? Like he's a physical corner. About 80% of the time he's going to get away with it. You learn to live with the other 20%. Denzel Burke feels like you never hear about that guy unless he's getting an interception or he's getting smoked. And in this game, he was getting smoked. And they just went at him constantly. I think I saw a stat where passes to his side of the field accounted for like 180 yards or something like that, like directly on him. He just had a horrible night. Played really, 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 really
probably
poorly.
The worst game of his career.
Yeah, it was really bad. And
it was reminiscent of the fact that like he had a great freshman year and then he had a big sophomore slump and kind of gradually rebounded last year going in and had good momentum going into his senior year. But I'm worried this game kind of in some ways is reflecting the trajectory of Shaun Wade's career at Ohio State. Even though Wade didn't play, like Wade's most successful time at Ohio State was when he was the tertiary corner as a freshman, and then he gradually started to get picked on as he became more of a primary starter. I don't think that Burke's been playing outside corner role his entire time, but he still had his most success when he was in the younger stages of his career here, and then gradually started to get picked on. The most prominent example I can think of was when they played Penn State, and I think it was Jahan Dotson just absolutely was running circles around him in that game that I believe was at Penn State. It could be another Penn State receiver. I could have my Nittany Lions skill players from yesteryear mixed up, but point is, that was who I was thinking of when I was watching Burke on Saturday night. I was just thinking this is like Shaun Wade all over again in terms of all this promise from an outside skill player just going up in smoke. It was difficult to watch.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But the thing is though, is like, and that made me nervous. What gave me hope during the game is that Ohio State's offense, even after losing Josh Simmons, which is like, out of all of this, probably the worst thing to come out of this game, frankly, in my opinion.
Like it's one of the things that makes me long-term very discouraged about.
100%. I mean, you're
forward.
Losing your starting left tackle, probably your best offensive lineman for the season. That's horrible. I thought Zen Mikowski, when he came in, played really well. I thought he did a good job, but like it's really hard to project what that's going to look like, for the rest of the season. Especially when, Oregon was already missing their best pass rusher. Who knows what that would have looked like if, Burch had played. I don't know. There's a lot of maybes here. But anyway, one of the things that gave me hope, at least, was that Ohio State was continuing to punch back, right? Like, it wasn't like the offense just stopped. Like, Will Howard, and we're going to talk about how the game ended, but Will Howard had a great game until really the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter.
Great game soured by a poor ending.
Yeah, he was incredible.
It wasn't even entirely on him, but I think was more reflective of, coaching mistakes, but we'll get into that soon.
Right. So Ohio State, again, another big drive, an almost 80-yard drive. Will Howard is just like, he's finding dudes all over the field. Jeremiah Smith has a really nice catch. And then Oregon in the subsequent drive. So Ohio State's up 28-22. Oregon does not take the points at the goal line. They get stopped at 4th and goal and turn the ball over. And at this point, you're like, all right, well, that's it. Ohio State gets a couple first downs here. If they score points, they get a field goal. That's it. Game over. And the way they had been driving, the way they had been doing things, you're like, okay, this is going pretty well. First series, they get a 1st and 10. And then they're at 3rd and 3 all of a sudden on their own 27, and you get a fumble. And that's, I think, where the entire game just turns on its head. And after that, I was like, this is Oregon's to lose, because now they're the ones with the momentum. They got to score points, which they do. They immediately get a touchdown. Ohio State fires back with their own field goal. But now you're giving, Dylan Gabriel, a guy who's been carving up your secondary all the time in the world, to do what he wants to do. They do end up getting a field goal to go ahead 32-31. And, let's talk about the end of the game, because again, another situation where Ohio State is driving. They looked really good. I'm looking at this. They got into 3rd down once up until that little final series there, but they were kicking butt. And you've got, what is it? A 1st and 10. Yeah, you got a 1st and 10 at the Oregon 28. You've got 22 seconds left and a timeout.
Well, before we even get into that, there's one parallel I want to draw quick here, because
sure, yeah.
it makes you, especially relative to the conversation around Howard. Mm-hmm. There were several people that we work with that thought Howard had a horrible night based on what happened in the final minute of the game.
Yeah.
And we're so hyper focused on what happened in that last 30 seconds that it's easy to lose sight of the play that got them into field goal range.
Mm-hmm.
He made one of his best throws of the season to Emeka Egbuka.
In
a play where they needed to get they needed a chunk play to definitively get them into range, not just on the outskirts of it. And nobody has brought that up. I think even one, I can't remember if it was on 3rd down. I remember being really frustrated with the fact that Jeremiah Smith fell short of the 1st down. But then I can't remember if it was on 3rd down that Howard made.
So it was a 2nd and 1. It was a 2nd and 1.
Okay.
And he threw a 26-yard pass to Emeka, and it was a dime. It was a laser. I mean,
it was one of the best throws he's made all year. And I've been critical of that guy being able to throw the ball beyond 15 yards from the first snap of this season.
Yeah, it was incredible.
It gets completely lost in the wash because of how the game ended. And it reminds me of, if you'll recall, the 2000, I believe it was the 2018 NFL playoffs, where the Bears were playing the Eagles, and nobody remembers that the play preceding the infamous double doink was probably the best throw that Mitch Trubisky has made in his entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on 3rd down and I think long, and the Bears needed to get into field goal range, and he threw a perfect pass that fell right into his receiver on the sideline that set the Bears up perfectly for a field goal that I believe their kicker made on the first try before the Eagles got a timeout, and then that ended up freezing the kicker, and then the infamous is what's his name, Collinsworth coined it, the double doink. And then the Eagles go on to win the Super Bowl after that.
That's
not immediately after that game.
Yeah.
The same playoffs.
Yeah, in the
but history is written by the winners, and nobody remembers the fact that Trubisky made the best throw of his life to set them up, and that just gets lost in the wash.
Right.
And that's almost immediately what I started thinking of, not only as a Bears fan, but when this happened with Howard and then the game fell apart. I said, nobody's going to remember that the reason they were even in potential position to get a game-winning kick at the end of this game was because he made a great play.
Well,
in the same way that when CJ Stroud scrambled to set up Ohio State for a field goal against Georgia at the end of the game, nobody remembers that because the kick from Ruggles afterwards, who was like a 94% kicker at Ohio State for his career, has the worst shank of his life in the biggest moment. We only remember the biggest, most consequential moments, and we don't remember any of the great plays that set up those potential events to happen. And it makes me feel really bad for the conversation around Howard, because he did answer a lot of questions about his ability to compete against top teams in this game that I think are going to be tarnished by what happened during the final 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't. That's the thing. Like, the reason why Ohio State was in that game and they were doing so well is because they kept counterpunching, in large part because Will Howard had to throw the ball a ton. I think he had almost 350 yards passing, and was incredibly efficient. Did an excellent job, spreading the ball around, getting it to guys who were open. Carnell Tate had a really significant catch on that last series after not really doing much the rest of the game. I mean,
I think that was his only catch the whole night.
Yeah. So, and that was after being sacked on the first play of that drive for like 10 yards. So he played really, really well. And then you get down to the end here, and it's like, again, 1st and 10. They're on the Oregon 28. They've got 22 seconds left and a timeout.
Just run the ball.
Just run the ball. And
it makes me so, and you can't put that on the players.
No.
I mean, that is squarely on the decision making, whether it was Chip Kelly or Ryan Day. In Chip's case, I think he called an otherwise pretty good game, but the critical decision making in that moment was just not what it needed to be.
Right.
You got to put your players in the best position to win.
And
I hate to be that Monday morning quarterback nitpicky guy.
Right.
But that was my biggest, above anything else that happened that you can put on the coaches in that final sequence of plays. That was the one that bothered me the most, because if you just run the ball there, you're not exposing yourself to any of the stuff that happens afterwards.
Right. I mean, what's the worst thing? I mean, look, if you set yourself up on the 25-yard line to kick a game-winning field goal and the guy shanks it, fine. The guy shanks it. I mean, college kickers, what are you going to do? But like, you've got to give your team the opportunity to do that. The OPI, the offensive pass interference, a lot of people are saying there's no way that's often. I can see why a ref would call that. And honestly,
I totally agree. I completely agree.
And the thing is, like, I think it's a ticky-tack call, but also don't put your guy in the position where he's got to try to make a play on the ball and then potentially create that foul. You know what I mean? Like, there's no real reason for that. And I understand, like, again, Jeremiah Smith, he's the dude, he's the man, he's reliable. That's not a bad play during the game, but in that moment, I don't know that you put a guy in that position.
I mean, he made a mistake earlier in the drive going short of the sticks that cost them like 15 or 20 seconds on the clock, when I think he could have very easily converted the first down.
Yeah.
Well, so it's like, why are you putting more faith in a young player like that just made a mistake like that?
Yeah,
just go with the safest option and keep the ball on the ground.
Yeah, give it to Trey, get some yards, and then call timeout and kick the field goal. And the thing is, man, is like, it feels like this happens so often sometimes with Ryan Day, where, and again, it's not just Ryan Day, right? This is a collaborative effort between the entire coaching staff, but it is Ryan Day because he's the head coach. But you're making this more complicated than it has to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just take the ease. Like,
and he's done this at the end of multiple close games.
Right. And that's something that bothers me, where I'm like, dude, it doesn't have to be that complicated. And I know, like, somebody was saying after the game that he got roasted for trying to do this against Georgia, but I'm like, there's a huge difference between a 50-yard field goal and like a 35-yard field goal. You know what I mean? Like, those are not congruent. Those are very different propositions. So just take what you have and get the points and win the game and get out of there. So that was frustrating. That was really frustrating how that ended. I don't hate the play call, but I hate the play call in that situation because it's not necessary. It's not something that needed to happen. I hate the play call. Well, that's fair.
It's not what you should do.
And then
it's very easy to just not do that.
Right.
Just hand the ball off.
Right.
And then did it. I don't think they ran the ball enough in this game, frankly, but it's very open and shut what you should do in that situation when you're already in field goal range. There's no reason to get greedy. Just run the ball.
Yeah. Get the points, win the game, get the hell out of there. And the thing with Will Howard and not sliding in time or whatever, like I don't crap on him for that. I mean, he was trying to
I
make
am
a
a
play.
little bit more. I'm more upset with that than I am the OPI thing.
How so?
You're a fifth-year senior. You need
Just
to
throw
have
the ball away, basically?
Well, not even that. I can understand like scrambling in that situation, fine, but you got to have an internal clock before the ball's even snapped.
Right.
Like you gotta know.
You gotta just be counting down. Say 3,
I don't even
2,
have 6
1.
seconds. I have 5 because I need to make sure that by the time I get down, I need to have an idea of how far I need to go and how much time I have to get there, and give myself enough time to be able to call timeout. And that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like I can understand not throwing the ball because you want to protect it. That's fine. But if you're going to take the time to fake the throw and then scramble, you have to recognize, okay, I only have this much time left, so I have to go down at a certain moment to make sure that I have enough time left. And he just went a little bit too far.
Mm-hmm.
And it's razor close. Like, it's tough to be super mad at him, but at the same time, you're the ball carrier in that situation. You put that responsibility on yourself. You're the leader of this offense. You're the manager of this offense at the very least. You have to shoulder the responsibility in that situation to know what you need to do to deliver victory.
Sure.
And it didn't happen there. And I mean, I feel like Howard should know better. I'm willing to be forgiving of it because of the game that he had otherwise. So I put that much more on the coaching staff for not having their player prepared to know what to do in that moment than I do on the player for actually committing the error.
And I think that's kind of where I'm at too, is that if you're Ryan Day, like you've got to have contingency plans in place for things like this, where you know exactly what to say to these guys, tell them exactly what to do, some kind of thing like, hey, 3 seconds and get down or something like that. Like that's, you've got to be able to drill that in the guys' heads and have them prepared for that moment. And it didn't feel like anybody's prepared for that moment.
There's no excuse for Ohio State ending that game with 1 timeout remaining.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the biggest
that they were in.
Right. And that was
particularly
the biggest thing
after Oregon called a timeout of their own.
Right.
Only a couple plays prior.
Right.
And we can speculate on the Polish defense and whatever, the Buddy Ryan or what have you, philosophy of the 12-man thing. Personally, I feel like Lanning probably deserves the benefit of the doubt based on the game that he coached otherwise, in terms of taking risks and making savvy decisions. That
I mean, like the onside kick.
I mean, that on purpose.
Yeah, I mean that was, and we did confirm. I guess that was Caleb Downs who got victimized by that, which is, I mean, that sucks.
By the onside, yeah, which is surprising.
Yeah, but again, like that's a crazy. I mean, that's one of those. That's one of those plays. That's one of those things you have to do in that moment to win those kind of games. And it doesn't always pay off.
What are you going to do? Shoot the jugs machine at your special teams?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, that's my point. Exactly. Right.
That's almost an impossible situation to simulate.
That's my point. Those are the kind of things that you have to do to give yourself an edge in games like that, because there's no way to prepare for something like that. I mean, it's ridiculous. It sucks, but it's not like
it's so ridiculous that it just might work.
That's right, and it did. And like I was kind of alluding to earlier, Oregon broke a lot of their tendencies in terms of what they did, especially in the passing game. Went deep a lot. We didn't even talk about the fact that a guy got spit on during the game. And then, we had an ejection because of it. Just a lot of crazy
one of the
stuff.
Stupidest things I've ever seen in a football game.
What an idiot. I mean, and right in front of the referee too. Like
that's really what it was. Like if you're away from the officials, I can see you trying to get away with something like that.
Yeah.
Especially because it's usually the retaliator that gets penalized for it.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, when they said number 1 is disqualified, my immediate thought was Igbinosun just did something so stupid to get himself. Igbinosun just did something to get himself thrown out. And then I realized, they're talking about the Oregon player.
That's right. No, I did too. And
I was like, well, I need to see this now. And then I
Right.
saw the sideline judge standing around. I'm like, that is just transparently stupid.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Why?
I'm sure
For
Igbenogson
what
said something completely out of pocket, but that's fine because it worked, and that's.
He
but
probably got sick of Igbenogson celebrating like another like, oh, that quarterback throwing the ball 15 feet over the receiver's head. That was totally me. Let me do the samurai sword celebration. Yes, the refs didn't notice that I totally mogged that guy for the first 10 yards of his route again.
I love it. I love it.
It bothers me how much he celebrates stuff like that.
I don't have a problem.
I know there's a lot of
corners
that do that, but
yeah. It's
it just makes it look worse when you get burned. But it's not like he was the one getting burned regularly Saturday.
Exactly. He played fine. He had an okay game.
He drew one Hawk Tua.
That's right. So anyway, ridiculous game. Here are some of my takeaways. This is just kind of my thoughts in general about where we go from here. First of all, my biggest thing is that Denzel Burke getting just completely destroyed is really bad. I don't know how fixable that is. I assume fairly fixable, but the truth of the matter is that it probably won't matter a whole hell of a lot for a while. You've got some teams that you're going to be playing.
Drew Aller is licking his chops.
Maybe, but who is he throwing to? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not, and Drew Aller's played really well this year.
I only said that because I know how you feel about it.
No, I know. I think he played like crap last year, but Drew Aller's played really well so far this year. He just doesn't have a lot of dudes to throw to. I think Burke will be fine. But my bigger concern was just the lack of quarterback pressures and not even necessarily how well the defensive line was playing. I thought they played really well, but I didn't think Jim Knowles dialed up a really good game. I don't think he put Dylan Gabriel in a position to make mistakes. He Gabriel had a ton of time to figure out where he was going to throw the ball on Saturday. And that's the more worrisome part about, to me, is that you're not making the opposing quarterback uncomfortable. And in all of these marquee losses that we've seen where we bemoan how it's ended and all this stuff, it's because so often the high use players, the skilled players, the quarterbacks, etc., have been given a lot of room to do what they want to do. And I wanted to see Jim Knowles dial up the pressure, allow, guys like Downs, for example, to come in and do things that, and disrupt the offense's rhythm and timing and things like that. And I didn't see any of that. And then when you're just doing like really vanilla fronts and you're not seeing guys like Tumaloau and Jack Sawyer getting to the quarterback, then that's a recipe for disaster. So that's what worried me defensively, just in terms of like, where we go from here. That has to be something more, just more of a point of emphasis. Will Howard, I think, played really well. We just talked about Will Howard, but like, again, those mistakes, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. You have predicated this team has been built on the idea that it does not make mistakes. This is a veteran team. They've seen everything. They've done everything. They're not going to make these kind of mistakes. We still saw that. And that was really bad. And then not being able to run the ball in the second half, 12 carries for 19 yards. That's what they got. And that's not a recipe for winning football games. Like, I understand that they're trying to, come back and play from behind a lot, but you got to do better than that. And I know Josh Simmons was out, but that's not going to change. Like, he's not coming back. He's probably done for the season. So you got to figure something out to be able to run the ball consistently in the second half. And Ohio State's been a second half team, but if you're going to be playing the Penn States of the world coming up, you got to be able to run the ball throughout the game.
Well, I wonder how much that second half stat affected the decision to throw after getting on Oregon's 29 in the final few seconds, if they felt confident running the ball there. But again, at that situation,
I mean, how many yards do you need there?
Right. You don't need any more yards.
Yeah,
just put the ball on the ground,
who cares?
Center to the ball, get it wherever, Fielding needs to kick it, call where he's most comfortable, call timeout. Go and
who cares?
Put your faith in your kicker and go home.
Yeah, if you're getting a yard and a half, that's fine. That's all that's required. Yeah.
And that speaks into what's going to be one of my other takeaways that I will refer to in a second. But the first one that I want to get to, building off of what you just said about the pass rush, the two biggest things that concerned me going into this season, when people were talking about this being maybe the most complete Ohio State roster ever, I mean, I thought that was just frankly ridiculous talk for two reasons. I agreed that the defense was very built, but I was still concerned about how this team was going to perform against top competition on both sides of the line.
Mm-hmm.
I've been pretty clear at this point that I give Larry Johnson the benefit of the doubt relative to the defensive line, but it is really starting to wane for me a little bit after this game, particularly. The offensive line, we've already talked about it a little bit earlier. It's not like they necessarily had a bad night. I wasn't actually aware of that stat that you provided regarding the second half, which I do think is concerning. But again, I think long-term, the bigger concern rather than performance for the offensive line here is the fact that, replacing Josh Simmons and the fact that Donovan Jackson hasn't really played at an All-American level relative to preseason expectations this year either, I think is something else that concerns me a lot. But I'm still more concerned about how much of a letdown the defense has been. And I could frankly see that coming from the beginning of the season, because the truth of the matter is, for as good as we want to believe JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are, they have disappeared in several Ohio State games throughout both of their careers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the interesting thing for me, when I alluded earlier when you brought up the field position note, that I included that in the post-game article I wrote. And the other 2 points of emphasis that I wrote about in that article, I want to bring up here real quick. And the first one directly relates to the pass rush, because this was the I was a little bit surprised given the inconsistency I just mentioned with those two. But this was only the third game under Jim Knowles in which Ohio State hasn't recorded any sacks. The other 2 were Notre Dame last year, which they ended up winning, thankfully, in spite of that.
Sure.
And the other one was the Northwestern game in 2022 that was notoriously compromised by windy weather and made it impossible to throw the football. So, you can forgive them for not sacking the other team in a game where neither team was going to realistically attempt a forward pass.
5 passes attempted.
Exactly. So there's really only been 2 games in 3 years under Jim Knowles where there hasn't been a single sack recorded. So I can forgive that. But it's still really, really bad that it happened in a game of this magnitude.
It's just inconsistent.
You weren't able to come right.
Yeah, I mean, because
you feel like one or the other doesn't show up on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and they've both had games where they were completely dominant, right? Where they've completely taken over games where they themselves were the X factor that I think, the game turned on. And then they'll disappear for a game or 2, right? And you're like, where?
You rarely see both of them show up in the same game.
Right.
It's usually one or the other. This was a rare instance in which neither of them showed up, and I think the effect of it was felt very much. But the other side of that, and this is something that makes me concerned not only for the ceiling of this defense and the ceiling of this defense under Jim Knowles. The most alarming trend that I found after this game was that this was the third game this season of the 6 they've played so far in which Ohio State hasn't forced any turnovers. That happened 7 times last year in 13 games. It's happened in 15 of the 32 games in which Jim Knowles has been defensive coordinator.
Right.
That is an unbelievable statistic to me. That's 1 game short of half the games under Jim Knowles in which Ohio State's defense has not forced a turnover. And I grew up a Bears fan. I know Bears and a Steelers fan. So I know what a dominant defense looks like.
Right.
Like when you're working with NFL caliber talent, when you're putting those kinds of expectations on a defense, I know what that looks like. A defense that is unable to make its opponent, to force its opponent to make mistakes like that, cannot qualify as the best in the sport.
Sure.
It simply cannot. And that is the expectation that this defense has had, not only from Ohio State fans, but national, supposedly neutral college football experts from the first snap of this season.
You know what's interesting?
That is a trend that cannot persist if this defense wants to be as good as people expect it to be.
And
a lot of that falls on the pass rush to create more havoc that leads to more mistakes.
Now, interesting you say that. So it occurred to me, because you're right about that. I know they haven't been turning the ball over very much or getting too many turnovers. Last year they were tied for 124th nationally in takeaways. And I thought that was pretty wild. And currently this season, they are 43rd, but still basically half of what the number one team has. So, that's not great. You want to see that improve quite a bit. And I don't know how you coach that. I don't know how you change that. I don't know if that's something where it's it's treated as something that's incidental, but I do agree that the defensive line has a lot to say about that.
And that's what makes me concerned about long-term trajectory against high-level opponents, because that's not there's no easy outright way to say, oh, we're going to just,
there's no turnover
ourselves
button.
into more turnovers.
Right, exactly.
No, that's reliant on forcing your opponents to make mistakes.
Right.
It's not an easy thing to fix.
And that's a great point, because that's exactly, Dylan Gabriel played essentially a flawless game, right? He played as perfect a game as you can pretty much get from a 5'5" quarterback, right? Who you didn't really, they didn't put a ton of heat on this guy during the game. More than I think people would have expected. He had some, pressures and things like that, but you didn't make him that uncomfortable, and he essentially completed everything. And so you've got to figure out a way, if that's what's happening, if you've got a quarterback that is on that kind of streak and is feeling that confident, you have to make him uncomfortable some way. And Jim Knowles didn't do that.
And I recognize too that in this criticism, there's a little bit of Goldilocks behavior from myself, because first of all, and I referenced this in the article I wrote, there's no question that he's been a net plus over the last 3 years.
Oh, of course. Yeah. They're playing much better than they did.
Yeah, Kerry Coombs set a pretty low bar. Sure. Particularly looking at the last time this team played Oregon.
Yeah, I don't even know what Kerry Coombs is doing right now, but yeah.
I think he's a position coach for Cincinnati. But
there you go.
The point is, he Knowles has been a net plus, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. My biggest criticism of him during his first season at Ohio State was that the guy was way, way too eager to blitz in situations that really just did not call for it. It was a big reason why they were able to let Georgia come back in a game that they otherwise had the lead. I was very not happy with the fact that we saw a lot of second and long, third and long blitzes. I thought the defense needed to get more conservative. And, it's just in certain situations, you have to recognize the value of just protecting the sticks as opposed to trying to get home and create havoc. That was my biggest criticism the first year. Now we're 2 years later, and we're talking about things that, the easiest reason to fix, or it stands to reason at least, you think would be dialing up more aggressive blitzes and just being generally more aggressive on defense.
So what you're saying is we'll never be happy.
And that's why I just called myself Goldilocks.
No. I know
this is too. Right. First year's too hot. Now it's too cold.
Yeah,
and we're trying to find what's just right. And we're making it sound easier than it really is. So I recognize that.
Yeah.
But the other side of this that leaves me discouraged long term about this team, that is further reflected in the coaching, is another very alarming trend that I noticed after the game Saturday, which is that this team absolutely shoots itself in the foot on penalties all the time. They've had more penalty yards than their opponents in every single game this year. And given the quality of teams that they played before this game, that's unacceptable. Given the amount of games they've played at home in friendly confines, that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
The only game where they had less flags thrown on them than the other team was the Marshall game. This team is not disciplined in the way that it needs to be. And
See,
we can cry foul on the
I was
penalty
about
on
to say,
Jeremiah Smith and
that's
everything, but the reality is
just because the refs have it out for us. That's
a
what
more
it is.
disciplined team executes more effectively in the most important moments of the game that call for it.
Yeah.
And this team didn't have that discipline, and it hasn't had the discipline all year. And I don't know, I can't, based on the first half of the season, I can't feel good that that's going to improve.
Yeah.
And there have been several high profile games that Ohio State has had in recent years that have been compromised by super costly penalties.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest one that comes to mind for me was the last time Ohio State played Michigan at home, and Guy Scott Jr. had a completely baffling personal foul penalty
Oh yeah.
like after
That's
the
right.
play
Right.
that totally, I think it vaulted Michigan into the red zone on
Yeah.
what was their go-ahead drive of the game.
Yeah.
So this has been a theme: penalties in crucial situations against high-level opponents that a lot of people just gets lost in the sands of time. But it's been a theme under Ryan Day that hasn't been corrected.
Yeah.
And
That's
I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, this is just another reason we need to fire Ryan Day. I don't want to get rid of Ryan Day because realistically, I don't know how many people there
He's
are.
1-7 against the top 5, George. He's got to go.
And guess what? He would have been 2-6 if he won this game, and people would have still thrown that record back in his face.
That's right.
So I'm not one of these people calling for that. But this game did nothing to quiet that crowd. And I can at least understand where a lot of that anxiety is rooted in, because I'm starting to see it in terms of the trends of why I don't feel comfortable about this team specifically against high-level opponents the rest of the season. They're not getting the pressure that they need. They're not playing up to the standard of being the best defense in college football. And a lot of those problems are rooted in schematically what is happening with the coaching. And they play undisciplined in a way that the coaches do not have them prepared for executing in the biggest moments of the game. That's a coaching problem that isn't on the players, and that's not something that gets easily fixed. Coaches don't magically just figure it out in the middle of the season when they've demonstrated these problems over a long period of time.
Yeah, they've got really just one marquee opponent left here to kind of prove it against. I wouldn't necessarily
the Fighting Sigs.
Yeah. Actually, well then there's two. There's the Sigs and Penn State, and I'm not going to count Michigan because, as I wrote today, they are a bad team that if Ohio State does not beat by at least 3 touchdowns, I'm going to be very upset. And
they're still ranked.
Michigan's going to get worse as the season goes on. Anyway, but they'll have opportunities to rewrite this narrative. They've got a bye week coming up, obviously, this week. You got to fix some things, and that's I said this last week. The thing that interests me about college football and any sport or any team is the evolution that they undergo throughout a season. Now they've got to change, right? They've got to fix some things. I think it's within their capability, but they've got to take a long, hard look at how they approach certain things. Particularly, look, that Penn State game, I think a lot of people are kind of like, it's James Franklin. He's stupid. He always these big games.
That's been my mentality. I've been overlooking it a lot. And
I got to tell you something, man. That's probably going to be a whiteout at night in Happy Valley. They're a really good team. They've got some deficiencies that Ohio State should be able to exploit, but I don't know. That's going to be a huge test. So we'll see what that looks like going forward. We're going to do Ask Us Anything. Before we do that, we want to remind you that the 11 Dubcast is sponsored by the dry goods store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers. Check them out. We got a new Silver Bullets shirt out there that actually sold really well even after Saturday. So thanks for checking it out. And
I guess not everybody has the loss of confidence in the defense that some of us do.
So let's go ahead and move to Ask Us Anything. We want to remind you that you can send us questions to Ask Us Anything to Dubcast at 11warriors.com. DUBCAST. This first question is from Kevin. Do you know what year Ohio State started playing football? Do you know their record? I just looked it up online, Kevin. 1890, apparently. 1890. Their first game was against Ohio Wesleyan. So 2 institutions still kicking around. No school for the deaf and blind or anything like that. So they played that game. I could not find.
Isn't Wesleyan an all-female school though? Or at least now it is.
Is it now? I don't think so.
I
No,
thought
I
it
don't think it
was.
is. I don't think it is.
Oh,
I could be wrong, but I don't think it is. It's one of the Ohio Five. It's one of the the liberal arts, the ones that cost $50,000 a year to go to and things like that. But I don't know their record offhand, so sorry about that. Somebody more learned than I will probably be able to get you that. Alvin wants to know, our good friend Alvin wants to know, what is offensive pass interference? It's when the wide receiver, the receiver initiates contact and extends their arms to push the defender away from themselves before the ball arrives.
beyond 5 yards.
Beyond 5
the
yards.
line of scrimmage.
Yeah. I think the
Supposedly.
claim. Yeah, I think the claim a lot of people made is that the defender initiated contact with Jeremiah Smith. Maybe he did. It was, like I said, it was like one of those boom boom things. I don't know, as a ref, I would have thrown the flag just because it's that moment and it was so close. But on the other hand, like I said earlier, don't give them a reason, right? Like, don't
run
put
the ball, and that's not an
don't
issue.
put them in that situation. Again,
the aesthetics, and like you said too, like, you understood why they made the call, and I totally agree with you. Like, the aesthetics
it's not a terrible
of the play. At, like, when you slow it down and whatever, and are able, and again, it's the whole Monday morning quarterback routine that everybody scrutinizes every minute detail, and even we've done it on this show. But in live game speed, the aesthetics of that sequence were not good for Jeremiah Smith in terms of making a legal
He's a
play.
6'3", 215-pound guy going against a corner who's like 5'10", 180, and it's like, of course you're going to look like the aggressor in any kind of contact between the two of you. You outweight the guy by like 25 pounds. You're this massive specimen of a human being. You're gonna win that physical fight. It's not going to reflect well on you. And again, that isn't Jeremiah Smith's fault. I do not want to put that on him. I'm just saying he shouldn't have been in that position to begin with. Just run the damn ball. You don't have to worry about defining offensive pass interference.
That's another shirt that should be selling out the dry goods store.
Actually, I think we even had that on the website, as one of our ads, just run the damn ball. This is from Brian. He's got two questions. First, we kind of talked about, but is Denzel Burke good? I don't know. I want to believe that he is, but they picked on him, and you'll see that in games, right, where they identify a weak link in a defense and they'll just attack. And that's, why wouldn't you? I mean, if you can get guaranteed yards, you're going to go after that guy. I know that Matthews was a little PO'd after the game, got the angry emojis out there on social media. I get it. I mean, I think at a certain point, it probably would have been smart to rotate guys on the corner, but I don't know. After a certain point, the damage was done, and I don't know. It was pretty bad.
Like I said earlier, his trajectory reminds me of Shaun Wade. So if you thought Shaun Wade was good, there's your answer.
Yeah. Second question from Bryant. Would you rather lose a game like this Oregon game, or like the OSU Georgia game at midnight? Or in other words, at the very last, the very end of the very last play, or a game where there's no woulda, coulda, shoulda, just an old fashioned loss. Definitely an old fashioned loss. I would rather there's too many questions that are going to go unanswered when you have a loss like this that's so close, because there's so many variables that go into it. I'd rather not beat my brains in trying to dissect the one thing that Ohio State could have done differently to win. And, when they get beat, it's like, all right, well, then you could, just play better. You know what I mean? It's easier for me to digest just an ass whooping. You know what I mean? Than
no.
Well,
first of all, he said just a clean loss. So I'm thinking something of 10 points.
Okay, 10 points. So that's what I'm saying.
Something within 3 scores. Not there's no way that you would rather see an ass whooping.
Well, I'm defining that as
whooping.
You're picking nits. That's essentially what I mean.
This is an important distinction to draw here.
Okay, but that's essentially what I'm saying.
You would rather see what happened against Clemson in 2016 than what happened Saturday night?
No, obviously not. Obviously not. Like, you're picking nits. My point is that I would rather see them lose convincingly by 10 or 12 points than by a last second missed field goal or something like that.
This is like an impossible question. because I don't want to see them lose, period. This is this is like the thing that this is what I used to say about the 2016 election, which is that this is the choice between getting shot in the head and getting shot in the head. The only difference is whether the bullet comes from the left or the right. This is just an impossible question. I would need the context of what happened in both games, because it's like you're saying, there's more questions left unanswered by a close win, or I'm sorry, a close narrow loss than there are a blowout. Or I shouldn't even say blowout, just a good old fashioned loss, as Bryant alluded to.
See, you're psyching yourself out.
I'm not, because this can go a lot of different ways. This is a vague question that has no easy answers. At the same time, it is more emotionally agonizing to have to deal with the aftermath of a close loss, as we are dealing with as Ohio State fans right now, than there is a convincing loss in which there wasn't necessarily a drama component of we were in a really, really good position to win the game and it just slipped away. So in that sense, a convincing loss is worse or is better than a close loss. At the same time, I feel like in most cases, there's more things to feel good about long-term out of a close loss, such as this one, than if Ohio State had lost by, let's say, 10 points on Saturday.
I can see that, because Ohio
State
can
go both ways. It just depends on the context.
Because honestly, I think you could easily make the argument for Saturday that Ohio State played a really sloppy game. There are a lot of things that they normally would have done better that we've seen them do better. And if they do those things, they beat Oregon, right? And honestly,
it came down to a handful of decisions in the final minute of the game.
And they still only lost by one in a top five, against a top five opponent, and in a hostile environment, across the country. Like, there was a lot of things that went into it, and they kind of played like crap in a lot of ways defensively, and they still weren't at the very end. So yeah, I think that's a good point. There are ways that you can go. There are positives to take away from this, because, like I said, in large part, like the offense, even with the hits they took on offensive line, even the fact they couldn't run the ball in the second half, they played really, really well throughout. And that's, I think, a good thing that you can take away from that. Last thing real quick. This is from Evan, and this is kind of related. Does having to write an article about a tough loss completely suck, or is it cathartic? It depends on the situation. Like, I don't know. You know what?
I've covered 2 Michigan losses to Michigan in this game now in my time at 11 Warriors.
I don't think it's ever been cathartic. I'll be honest. Like, I don't think I've ever been like, I got to get this out of my system and I'll be fine after a loss. Like, the only time it's been cathartic. It's
not as fun as writing after a win. I know that much.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, in 2014, when they went on the run, like, I wrote like 3 articles after the Alabama game, and I wrote like 4 articles after the national championship, and I stayed up all night in both cases. And that was cathartic. Like, I felt like I had emotionally put all of my feelings out into the internet, and I felt great. I've done that after losses, and I still feel like crap. Like, it doesn't make me feel any better. So I just think it sucks. I don't know that I could really say that it's helpful in any way, personally. Now we're at a point where I don't have to write 4 articles because we have a much larger staff.
It conceptually, before you actually start writing, it's horrible, because you're
you got to think about you got to revisit all this crap you don't.
You're still emotionally processing the result, and you have to like immediately put that aside and just go deliver the facts of the situation in a digestible format to the audience. That is not an easy thing to do when you are grappling with that kind of frustration.
Yeah.
And it makes me really, really like I have had the comfort of being able to do that from my own like desk and monitors and everything. It makes me respect so much more what guys like Dan and Andy have to do when they're actually, I know Andy didn't travel for this game, but people like Dan and the rest of the beat that actually go make the trip and then, have to do all of the reporting and analysis in the immediate aftermath. And then,
especially like what they had to do in Oregon, where they're in a tent that sounds like they're being surrounded by like the Mongol horde, and they're like, you can hear the roars of the crowd as they're like walking by. Like, yeah, that was ridiculous.
I've even heard stories from Dan about like, even going back to last year where they're like in the car in the AM hours leaving South Bend, and they're still writing on their laptops, like remotely as they're commuting back to Columbus.
Yeah.
And it's like, imagine if that was after a win that they had to do. Can you imagine if Ohio State lost that game and you got to be dealing with all that on the way home? I mean, that's the professionalism of those guys is second to none for the work that they put in.
Yeah,
and
legit.
Games like Saturday where it's like we have to deal with the emotional letdown of this victory slipping away, and then provide all of the information as to why and how it happened to the audience when it's already past,
it's 3 a.m.
I think the game ended at 11, but I was writing until like 3 a.m. on the East, at least 3 o'clock on the East Coast on Sunday morning.
Right. And they got to deal with jet lag and like all this other crap. I mean, 100%. Like that's rough.
So it's not cathartic. It does help you kind of it does help me. I will say, like, I had a headache all weekend.
Sure.
But it wasn't just because of this and the work, aside, but it does help you. Like once you get over that, once you're like, okay, I gotta, get out of my funk because I gotta write. Once you start logically digesting the reasons for why this happened, it kind of helps you get over it more quickly.
Yeah,
so in that sense, I think it is a little bit cathartic after a loss, but it certainly isn't as fun as after a win.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is mostly just gloating.
Now, with that said,
on success.
With that said, we've talked about this loss for about an hour now, so maybe it is cathartic.
I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it's worth it too. But my point
what do
is,
we have to look forward to next week? We're on bye again.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe we do need it. Maybe it is a little bit cathartic. Thank you for sending those questions in. Keep sending them. We'll keep answering them. There were a few. We usually talk about the national scene here. I don't think we have to talk about too much. Although the rest of the country kind of looking booty still, like in terms of the top 10. Texas beat the crap out of Oklahoma, but Bama barely got past South Carolina. Penn State needed overtime to beat a really mediocre USC team. Georgia had to fight off a 1-5 Mississippi State team. Florida
literally fight off.
Yeah, that's right. Florida took Tennessee to overtime. It doesn't look good overall, but the grand scheme of things, I don't know. This is an interesting year for college football, and it's going to even get more interesting with the 12-team playoff. Texas.
It does feel like there's Texas and everybody else right now. I'm not ready to outright say Texas is bad, but they got to play Georgia this week.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's going to be really interesting to see how that game shapes up. And Georgia's going to want to get. That's huge for them right now. I know they really want that. But the thing I wanted to say before we get out of here, the thing that we were all really anticipating us talking about was, of course, women's hockey sweeping number 2 Minnesota over the weekend. They got the shootout win on Saturday. They took it to them on Friday. Ohio State was ranked 4th or 5th, depending on which poll. Minnesota was a consensus number 2. They took them to Minnesota. They took them down. So now they're 5-2-1 on the year. Coach Mozzarell's got them just rolling right now after that bad start to the season. So definitely keep an eye on those dudes, those ladies, I guess. Sorry.
And once again, you were far too pressed about the beginning of their season. I know.
You know what?
You got to take a long-term approach.
They have it rolling. They're going to be playing again this coming weekend.
Was it Minnesota Duluth?
It was
they
Minnesota
lost
Duluth
to twice. Yeah, and now they've beaten the big Minnesota, Minnesota that actually matters.
That's right, number 2.
Again,
5-2-1 on the year. The women's hockey team's got it rolling. Definitely check them out if you can. And then
And
also
Muzzerall cemented herself as the best head coach at Ohio State after
already
Ryan
did
Day's performance.
Already did, but yeah, she had already been there. But
I said cemented. I didn't. It was just further established.
Two
natties
in the last 3 years. I mean, you got to give it up. Last thing I want to say here, though, we gotta start talking about this because we now officially have confirmation that the Nebraska game is going to be a big nooner, which means that the 11 Dubgate will be taking place Saturday, October 26th, in the hours leading up to that big nooner. We typically prefer it to be a little later in the day, as it is a Dubgate. It is the tailgate, but it'll be taking place same place it's been for a while now. We're going to be there, I guess, behind VC, right? Yeah, behind the Varsity Club in the corner of Tuttle Park Place and Norwich Avenue. Proceeds go to the Special Olympics. So definitely an awesome cause. Check it out. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be there, but lots of Logan Warriors guys.
I was gonna ask if you were, because we were both there last year. Obviously.
We were there and it was incredible. Last year was great. I think
last year was one of the most
attended.
Successful ones they've had.
Yeah, it was awesome. So if you can get out there, definitely do so. Again, I will send my. I'll be there in spirit. I promise. But yeah, one of those things.
I'm undecided, but I'm leaning towards probably not attending. And hearing that you're not going to be there, Johnny, and I'm not going to have you as a safe social point of contact at the event it further deters me from going. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that should not deter anyone else from going. And honestly, it should be kind of an incentive, I guess, for some people if I'm not going to be there.
And just to clarify, like if I was in Columbus, I would go. I am very, very many states away.
Yes.
It wasn't merely a matter of a plane ticket and finding lodging and everything. I would be there in a heartbeat. It was a blast last year. It was a great lead up to the Michigan State game. Mm-hmm. I'm not just saying that because it was on my birthday. I had a very, very, very nice time, and I would encourage everybody to go. It supports a great cause, and there's lots of food and drink. Just do so responsibly, because not everybody did that last year.
Yeah, that's right.
But that also speaks to how much of a party it can be.
It is. So just to remind you about that, 11 Dubgate, check it out. We've got information on the site about it. And thanks for listening. This was, I guess, in a way cathartic. It wasn't a fun thing to talk about, but it was a thing. And I'm glad we could get some stuff off our chests. And now we've got a week to stew about it until
I was going to say, no, this wasn't cathartic. I'm going to stew over everything I just regurgitated at you for another 2 weeks until this team plays Nebraska.
Right.
So
there you go. All right. Well, until next time, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.